Before we begin, thank you very much to Sierra M for joining my Patreon campaign. Thank you so much for the support. It means the world to me. You guys have been absolutely incredible lately. I've only got a few shout outs left to get through before I am finally caught up. That's not going to happen. But I'm almost there. If for some reason you hate my normal intro and want this to continue, then please visit the links in the description to my Patreon. You get previews, you get first look at some of the videos when I have the time to produce them in advance, and you get access to my Discord server. So if you want a few extras and want to keep the channel going, please consider even a little bit will help. All right. So we have a bit of an overview to do here. I've decided that as I finish these episode review series that I want to do just like a overview of the entire show. And in this case, ask myself if the show lived up to the perception that I had with the fans and the one that I had going in. With the case of Beast Wars, the question is it the best Transformers cartoon series? Now, that is an entirely subjective thing, right? So if you like the pacing and the characters in Transformers Prime, that's a valid choice. If you like how colorful and unique Transformers Animated was, that's a valid choice. I mean, even if you like kind of the grittier look in the Netflix series, that's a valid choice. It really is. If you like Transformers Go the best, we have issues. All right. So just to be clear here, you're wrong, and you need help. But with that exception, what you view as the best Transformers cartoon is entirely based on what you like to see in a show. So this is just an opinion. It is not right or wrong. It just comes from my personal experiences. So Beast Wars as a show is remembered as being very tightly well written. It is remembered to be very clever with its writing, and on a rewatch, I do find that to be largely true. In season 1, you do have a lot of very kind of trope-driven episodes, or at the very least, things that are very typical of Transformers. G1 had an episode where the Autobots were locked in their beast mode, or in their vehicle modes. So you have that repeated in two different ways here. In Call of the Wild, where they had to stay there by choice, or in the Probe, where they are literally forced to be in their beast mode. So you have a few things that are recycled. You've got some very kind of standard kind of plots, but it is all very character establishing. And as the show goes on, you do start to see how the characters are going to go. Cheetor has a lot of growing up to do. Rat Trap and Dinobot begin to have this, this rivalry between them. And Rhinox has to be the cool-headed one who's also the muscle when necessary. You start to see where everyone falls into place. So season 1 is mostly just establishment. And it's kind of halfway through that we start introducing the things that will carry through storyline-wise for the rest of the series. And toward the end is where we start seeing the really clever writing. The way Megatron manages to stay ahead of not only Maximals, but his own minions. The way he's able to turn situations around to his advantage. Is for all intents and purposes, he technically won at the end of season 1. And is just thanks to some Deus Ex that he was defeated a few episodes later in season 2. But he actually, as far as Megatron goes, and when I talk about the writing, Megatron is by and large what people talk about the most, is just as far as just being a very smart, clever villain, and far more so than the original G1 Megatron. G1 Megatron could come up with a scheme to last an episode or two, but it always ended in defeat. Megatron in Beast Wars does claim a few victories from time to time. He actually is successful in some of his attempts. I talk about the episode The Probe. That episode is entirely a Maximal loss. He defeated the Maximals for the episode. And it's not the only time he had the edge up on them. I mean, it makes him a far more, dynamic villain and a far more successful one than, your G1 Megatrons and whatnot that are by design, made to fail. This one was allowed to succeed to the point where even amongst his own troops, he was always ahead. The one that I point out the most is in the agenda part 3. And it is throughout the agenda, Megatron has this long game that he is playing, and Ravage kind of interrupts it, but he still turns even that situation to his advantage to continue out his real goal here. There is a moment where he gives Waspinator a order to go to a set of coordinates, and Black Arachnia recognizes those coordinates and sets about a plan to get there before Megatron. This is when she had the codes to this is when she had the codes downloaded to her, right? So, the codes from the Golden Disc. He did this. He gave this order to Waspinator solely because he knew it would trigger Black Arachnia into action. She would voluntarily go to where the Ark rested to try and get there and access it herself before Megatron could. And that's what Megatron was counting on. So he didn't have to lure her there. He didn't have to kidnap her or capture her and force her to do it. She went there of her own accord. He knew that, and he took advantage of that and nearly wiped out all of time. Not only because he could pull the wool over the Maximal's eyes, but also because he could do it to his own crew. That's a villain. That's a really good, enjoyable villain. Not the kind of villain you just love to hate because they're so awful as a person, but just a villain that is just so good at being, just so good at being what they are, right? And just being such a good foil for the heroes. And that kind of writing goes through everything in this series. The show is not afraid of doing romances. We saw more than one. We saw with Tigatron and Airazor, and the big one, of course, is Silverbolt and Black Arachnia, and that is what drove her from kind of power hungry in the name of survival to legitimately being a hero by the end of the series. I often find that Black Arachnia is this very brilliantly written character that unfortunately shares a series with Dinobot and Beast Wars Megatron, to the point where I feel like she kind of gets buried in the talk of best characters. Because don't get me wrong, we talked about how good Megatron is. And obviously Dinobot is extremely well written, very complex for an after-school cartoon character. Dinobot is incredibly deep and complex. There's a lot of different facets to him. Not only his code of honor, but he's something of a warrior with a poet's heart. He'll recite Shakespearean tones and lines in moments of self-reflection. It's something he doesn't let any of the Maximals see until his dying breaths. And even that is even when you talk about that, you have to go into the guts this show had with what it did. You have I'm going so far away from the Black Arachnia thing, aren't I? Point being, I think she's a fantastically written character that should be talked about more, but we have to talk about Dinobot and Megatron instead, because those are the ones people cite the most as this is such a good character from the show. But when we talk about Dinobot dying and having the guts to make such a good character and then kill them off before season 2 is even done, it's not even a season 2 cliffhanger. Because the season 2 cliffhanger is bigger than a character death. It is just something to punctuate just how brutal the Beast Wars are and how serious it is. And it cements Dinobot's change from being the leadership hungry Predacon to legitimately being a hero willing to sacrifice himself for the future of humanity. It's a big shift. He went through a lot to make it to that shift. So it's incredibly heartbreaking when Dinobot does pass. Even watching it now, the episode was on here at the shop today, on the TV behind my head. And even then, I've seen this a dozen times, but there's still emotion to it when I watch it. It's done so well. The show in general has those elements of writing throughout that are just really, really good. And the show is also not afraid to be comedic, to take time out from its serious writing to throw in some literal Looney Tunes jokes. You know, we have The Low Road, which is literally a 22-minute fart joke. It's 21 minutes building up to a fart joke. That's what The Low Road is, right? That doesn't mean everything in the show is great, right? So there's some meddling from Hasbro that kept some elements like Tiger Hawk from hitting really strongly as it could have. Some elements with the Vok are a little bit off to me. And then things like Go With The Flow, I find to just be not a badly written episode, but just a very badly designed episode for the show. You know, it just didn't feel like it fit, right? So, writing-wise, yes, a lot to be said about how well written the show is and how well it weaves not only its own narratives throughout all 3 seasons, but also working in those G1 elements as well, working in the original storylines. Brilliantly done. We can talk about we can talk about music that's like got this appropriate kind of primal tone to it. It's a lot of drums, it's a lot of like heavy rock synth. It works well. It works really well. Like, you have these calm moments where you hear these like woodwind instruments, and it works, and like it sets this calm tone in your mind, and then these stingers that come in to let you know everything's about to go wrong. So, music on point. Voice acting. Whew. We talk, like, how often can we talk about voice acting in this show as far as, like, how good this show is? So, you've got, like, for starters, you've got Sue Blue, the original RC, at the helm for directing. And if you've known her, you know that she generally directs very, very well. The woman got her start, she got her start directing this little-known cartoon. I don't know if you'd even remember it or not. It's just this little show called The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. A cartoon that went on for, I believe, 8 seasons, which was, like, unprecedented for the time. 8 or 10. 8 or 10. I think 8 seasons of good stuff, and then 2 seasons of the Red Sky that is just, don't bother. But that's how she got her start on the biggest cartoon of the 90s. That is incredible. That is impressive. That is the talent that was on this show in the director's booth. And that has nothing to do, that has to say nothing about the quality of the voice actors. I mean, it's the Ocean Group. If you know the Ocean Group, you know how legendary that is. With, Gary Chalk and David Kay, obviously. You got Scott McNeil. Hey. Of course, I have to mention Scott. But you've got, like, Ian James Corlett. You've got Blue Man Kuma. Like, you've got all these, like, significant voices going into this show that just adds such the right tones to the characters. There's no voice in this show that feels off. Everyone feels like their character. Everyone feels like they match the designs, and it all feels like everyone knew exactly what they were going for. This heavy story, like this really involved story that still had room to be humorous and still had room to be, very much a cartoon for kids, but could also be very real. And could be very dynamic in how they depict the characters and tell the story. Everyone's on point. Like, at no point did I listen to the voice acting, rewatching this entire series, and go, I don't think Airazor is quite right. It's like no. Black Arachnia has these sultry tones that play to her femme fatale nature, and Airazor has kind of like a more motherly voice that knows when to get stern when it's time to fight, right? So like that combat ready mom kind of vibe to her, and that works. That works really, really well. The only thing you could really like push on Beast Wars about, as far as like, is it the best Transformers cartoon or not, is going to be the animation, because it is very early CGI. So if you don't know, Mainframe, the company that created Beast Wars, or at least as far as at least animated Beast Wars, They were the ones behind Reboot, the very first TV series in full 3D animation. Reboot was, you go back and watch early Reboot, it is pretty primitive. It is literally just them showing off their ability and their tech. But you could tell the art form was going to have a lot of potential, but not quite. Things smooth out a lot when they got to Beast Wars. Backgrounds are a lot more detailed. The character models move a lot better. You can definitely see the rough, the textures, especially on some like the background dirts and rocks. That's not so great, but of course, mid-90s CGI. And then, of course, the animation can feel a little bit stiff, but I always kind of ignore that because they're robots, right? So being a little bit stiff is not really that big of a surprise. They're machines made of metal enacting motions. Of course, the motions are going to be machine-like precision. So, yeah, I don't... Even though, yes, you can see that the animation's definitely old, it came from good people. And at the time, it was fantastic. You have to remember, you have to go look at shows like Donkey Kong Country, which was another 90s, like, very early attempt at full CGI animation. Action Man, which I think Action Man was a mainframe. I can't remember. War Planets was a mainframe. I remember that. So you see some of the lineage there. But you have to go to the outliers. You have to go to the outliers like Donkey Kong Country and, God help you, vampires. Yes, it is ripping off both Power Rangers and Transformers at the same time. We'll talk about it someday. But you have to go to those to see what other companies were doing with CG animation for TV. And it's rough. It's really rough. That is genuinely rough animation. In Donkey Kong Country, the rendering has a limit to it. If you watch, you'll notice that there's only 6 characters moving on screen at any one time. Like when an army of Kremlings is marching on the Donkey Kong home in the first episode, only 6 are shown at a time in close-up, even though there's supposed to be a whole army there, because they're very cleverly trying to hide the limitations of their animation. When you see very large groups of Kremlings in the same episode, they're static objects. They're not moving at all because they can't handle the rendering. So when you think back to like what 90s CGI looked like, realize that you had the pioneers, like the people who first did it. I mean, Mainframe got their start doing the Dire Straits music video, which blew everyone's mind. And that was like, the characters in that one are literally like 20 polygon stops. So at the time, so for the time, it was amazing. Now today, yes, you compare it to modern CG, of course it's going to look bad. But for what it was at the time, it was fantastic. And personally, I still think it looks good. And there's ways of watching it AI upscale, just saying. Make it look even better. But no, yeah, like looking at just like the raw nuts and bolts of the show. Yes, the writing is exceptionally good. It has its weak moments, but there's no writing in the world that is on point 100% of the time, I've watched shows that I've absolutely loved the writing for it. And then just like, like Netflix Voltron's a good example. I thought that was a very well-written show until the last couple seasons, and it all fell apart. But there's executive meddling to that one. I could say the same about the reboot Thundercats, where there's a lot of episodes, even the fillers, that were very well done and well-written. And then finding out what the writers wanted to do with the rest of the series, if they got it, made me go, okay, I don't feel so bad that it got canceled anymore. That's one to look up if you haven't looked it up. But for what this show is, yes, I do think it is as good as people say. I do think it holds up very well, if only because the voice acting performances and the writing hold up so well, even if you think the animation doesn't. And yeah, I think it deserves the accolade of the best Transformers cartoon we ever got, which is kind of strange considering it's technically only the second one we got. Unless you're in Japan, where you got a full set of shows we never saw, but you get the point. So that's my humble opinion about Beast Wars and exactly where it stands. Yes, for me, this is the best Transformers cartoon there is. Now, keep in mind, my Patreon goals will eventually, if they keep going up, they will force me to watch Transformers Prime again. I already have been committed to watching and reviewing Season 1 of Transformers Prime. And then the next tier up, I believe, was Transformers Animated. So we've got 2 other contenders for that title of Best Transformers Cartoon to consider at some point. So if the Patreon gets that high, maybe we'll find out. Maybe a rewatch of Animated will make me appreciate it in a way I didn't previously. And maybe that'll take the crown. Maybe that is my preference now. I don't know. We'll get there when we get there. But for now, yeah, Beast Wars is my favorite, and I'm prepared to say Beast Wars is the best. So, thank you guys for watching. If you were curious about how much I actually did like this series, even though I reviewed every episode, or if you just want your own opinions reaffirmed, I hope you enjoyed. And if this is not talking about your favorite series, who knows? When we review the others, maybe we'll have to shift the opinion. But that's for later. For now, thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Guys, I am facing the most powerful enemy any YouTuber can face, the algorithm, and I need your help to defeat him. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Every time you do, we attack that algorithm and we drive it back until it can no longer defeat this channel. Thank you very much.